Hi and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's book, the show comparison for the Expanse Season 2, Episode 7, The Seventh Man. This video is a part of a series of videos where I compare the Expanse TV show to its source material, pointing out the differences and giving my opinion on how well I believe these adaptations work. So I have to start with a spoiler warning for The Expanse up to the end of Season 2. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. However, I will not spoil events in the novels that have yet to appear in the show, so if you haven't read the novels, you are safe from future spoilers. However, I will spoil events in the novels that have already been covered by the show. Also, I am by no means an expert on the novels. I'm just some guy who's read them recently and thought it would be fun to compare the two, so I may miss out a few things from time to time. Anyway, we start the episode with the follow-up to the ending of the previous episode where Bobby and her team were attacked off-screen, but we saw the build-up and the immediate follow-up to the fight. And now we see the Martian military come to her rescue as she's lying dying on the ground. She's brought up to an MCRN ship where she's visited in the medical bay by a man in a Martian intelligence uniform who identifies himself as Commander Thorson. He informs her that her entire team is dead and that Lieutenant Sutton and 12 others that were on the ship monitoring her are also dead, which upsets her greatly. She begins crying and being non-responsive. She asks what happened, but Thorson responds he was hoping that she could tell him. Bobby then reports that 6 blues were charging their position, to which Thorson seems to believe her, but then Bobby begins succumbing to her wounds, so a nurse comes in to give her a sedative, which knocks her out. So in the novel, she's rescued much in the same manner and is brought onto a ship where she's interrogated by a Captain Thorson rather than Commander Thorson. Same difference, I know. Anyway, in the novels, Thorson forces the nurse to give Bobby drugs that will force her awake and make her able to respond to questioning, even though the nurse strongly objects, saying that it could kill her. The drugs enhance her senses so much that the lights hurts her eyes, and she is in a much worse state than she is here in the show. When Thorson tells her how many had died, she doesn't freak out like she does in the show because she remembers clearly seeing them die, so she's already aware of this. Also, she already remembered what happened, so doesn't ask Thorson. The rest of the conversation I will touch on a bit later, as in the show it's kind of transplanted to future scenes and passed around to several scenes throughout this episode, but she doesn't pass out as quickly as she does here. Ultimately, I think I have to say I like the book's version slightly more, as the extra element of her life being put at risk just so Thorson can question her adds an element of risk and shows what an asshole he is. Plus, as I mentioned before, I like the dynamic in the novels better where Draper remembers clearly what happened to her and her team on Ganymede, so I'm going to give this a -1. So next we go to the UN headquarters and get a scene with Aaron Wright and Avasarala talking to Secretary General Gillis on what they should do in response to the attack on Ganymede. Aaron Wright suggests that they attack a Martian target in response, but Avasarala suggests that they invite Mars to a peace summit on Earth. Aaron Wright argues that that would make them look weak, but Avasarala counters that forcing them to come to Earth will be a show of strength and a warning. Gillis sides with Avasarala, telling her that her father was smart, but she is smarter. Aaron Wright isn't happy about this. So in the novels, we do get a scene where Avasarala is in the meeting where it's discussed how they should respond to the Ganymede incident. However, in the novels, this is also the introductory scene of Avasarala. And instead of meeting with Aaron Wright and Gillis, she's in a meeting with a bunch of military leaders, including Admiral Wynne and Admiral Souther, and a representative of the diplomatic corps. The representative wants the peace talks, but all the military leaders want war. Avasarala says nothing for most of the meeting, but then declares that they will in fact do the peace talks, and nobody argues with her. They simply accept that the decision has been made, and then they put all their efforts into planning for the peace talks, and then Avasarala leaves the room, leaving them to it. She then later informs Aaron Wright of her decision, who doesn't disagree but is cautious. So in the novels, it was when we saw arguing for war, not Ehrenreich. And plus, Avasarala didn't have to convince anyone of anything. She just said it, and it will be done, and that's that. And I do really like that dynamic, that it shows how much power she holds. But on the other hand, I do like her having to convince Gillis, and that she in fact beats out Ehrenreich and makes the more convincing argument. And I like Gillis's comments about how she's smarter than her father. This also shows how powerful she is, but more by showing how smart she is, so even better. So I'll give this a +2. So then we go to Tycho Station, where the Rocinante crew are helping care for all the refugees arriving from Ganymede. We also see Dawes there throwing out supplies, acting like some sort of messiah. Holden criticizes Dawes as power-hungry and corrupt, but Naomi counters that he's sticking up for the belt. At least someone is. We then see that while Amos is handing out supplies, a woman cuts in line, and Amos shoves her back, but her young son, a child of like 10 or younger, yells at him, telling him to leave his mother alone. This has a huge impact on Amos. So in the novels, as I mentioned before, the Rocinante was not shown on Tycho after the Ganymede incident, and instead went directly to Ganymede. And although we went to Tycho, they went to Tycho after the Ganymede incident, no scene like this, or any other scene we get in this episode for that matter, ever occurred. So all the stuff involving Holden and Tycho in this episode is pretty much way off book. Tycho was never shown receiving an influx of refugees from Ganymede, and Dawes certainly never showed up there. As I mentioned, Dawes was a totally different character in the books and didn't really appear that much. So honestly, I don't like how Naomi is defending him here in this scene. She seems naive and caught up in nationalism, which is a change in her character from the books that I really don't like. Also, the thing with Amos and the kid is setting up for a storyline I find boring and unnecessary, so I'm going to give this scene a -3. So on that note, the next scene we get is with Amos talking to Dr. Cortazar about, how he was turned into a sociopath. Cortazar mentions that it was his choice to do it, and he chose to stay that way as he thinks it's better. Amos opens up about the incident with the kid and how it reminded him of a woman named Lydia who took care of him as a child, but Cortazar says it's better to forget about such sentiments, so suggests that he undergo a similar procedure to the one he went through, but Amos doesn't seem on board. Now, in the novels, as I mentioned before, Cortazar doesn't exist in this part of the story and was introduced after the fact in the noveletta, and then later introduced into the main storyline in Book 5, so he was never seen on Tycho as part of this story. And I honestly thought this was a very clunky way to try to introduce Amos's backstory, and I didn't really buy him opening up to Cortazar in this way, so I'm going to give this a -2. So next we get a town hall meeting type scene with all the representatives of the factions of the OPA, where Fred Johnson suggests that they engage with peace talks with Earth and Mars to ensure that the OPA has a powerful position in the new dynamic in the system, and thus legitimize them as more of a legitimate government. However, when someone questions Johnson, who is an Earther, having an Earther represent them, Johnson suggests that it be Dawes that should represent the OPA at these talks. Dawes then speaks up, where he talks more to the crowd than he does to Johnson, where he compliments Johnson but then disagrees with him, saying that it's not in their interest for Earth and Mars to make peace, because if they do, they would then turn their attention back to the belt. However, when the topic of the UN missiles comes up, Holden speaks up in Johnson's defense, and again, Dawes compliments Holden but then passively aggressively insults him and says that he doesn't understand the belt. But he does agree that the best course of action is to return the missiles to the UN. Now, no such thing like this takes place in the novels, as at this stage in the novels, Fred Johnson is already, in fact, representing the OPA in peace talks with the UN and Mars, and he used his position of having the protomolecule sample as a bargaining chip to do so. And in the novels at this stage, Fred is portrayed as the unquestionable leader almost de facto president of the OPA. And the inner conflicts and disagreements with the OPA factions isn't really explored until Book 5. Also in the novels, Dawes and Fred Johnson are not passive aggressive rivals as they are here in the show, but the relationship would be better described as a mentor protege type relationship. In fact, Dawes thinks very highly of Fred Johnson as he recruited him into the OPA. Although I do believe that later in the show it's revealed that it's also the case in the show that Dawes recruited Johnson into the OPA, but the relationship in the show is shown to be much more adversarial, and that Dawes doesn't really trust Johnson because he's an Earther, or sees him as an obstacle for his lust for power. But as I already mentioned, Dawes in the novels is almost an entirely different character and isn't the villain that he is shown to be here. But ultimately, I do really like this scene. I think the dynamic here where the OPA don't just blindly follow an Earther like Johnson makes a lot more sense. Also, I like that it shows how fractured and disorganized they are, and despite him being completely different from his book counterpart, I do really like the dynamic of having a power-hungry character like Dawes brings. So I'm going to give this a +3. So next we get a follow-up scene after the meeting where Naomi scolds Holden for interfering in the OPA meeting, saying that he should have let Johnson defend himself. Holden argues he was just trying to be the voice of reason, but Naomi points out that all the Belters there just saw two loudmouth Earthers telling Belters what they should do. Holden angrily counters that they're all in this together and picking sides is bullshit, but Naomi counters that those that had killed everyone in Eros picked a side, and if Eros had hit Earth, he'd understand how Belters felt. I'm sorry, but what is she even talking about here? First off, she's wrong. The people who killed everyone in Eros didn't pick a side. In fact, aren't affiliated with any superpower, and in fact started a war between the superpowers to throw them off. Or did she forget? They are, in fact, a privately funded organization who manipulates superpowers rather than associates with them. Also, suggesting Holden would need Earth to be destroyed to sympathize with the Belt ignores his entire character story up to this point. Also, at the start of the scene, she displays this nonsensical nationalism that her book counterpart never would. So I don't like this scene at all. Naomi is being willfully ignorant to the point of being moronic, and her nationalism is blinding her to Holden's entire character development, which I don't buy, frankly, so I'm going to give this a -4. So we then go back to the MCRN ship where Thorson further interrogates Draper. She appears to be feeling much better now, and this time she's in an interrogation room. Thorson asks her about if she's ever been to Earth, but Draper only responds by saying soon enough, which suggests she's waiting for an attack. Thorson then takes some sensory-enhancing drugs that we've seen Martian intelligence officers use before and asks her to describe what happened on Ganymede. Draper explains that the UN Marines, or the Blues, charged their position and they were forced to defend themselves, and then she then states that if the UN wants a war, Mars should give them one. So Thorson says nothing, and his expression is hard to read here. So in the novels, they're kind of touching on issues that were addressed in earlier scenes with her in the hospital bed. So there was never an interrogation room scene like this. Further, Draper remembered clearly that it wasn't the UN that attacked them, as she knew full well they were running from the protomolecule hybrid. Thorson had blamed Draper's team entirely for initiating the attack and stated as a matter of fact. In fact, the question he asked her when she woke up was, "Why did you attack the UN?" A question that made absolutely no sense to her. And again, I have to say, I like the book's version of events better, as Draper comes off as a bit naive here, so I'm going to give this a -1. So next we get a scene of Dawes visiting the Rocinante, where he chats with Holden and Naomi. Holden is very hospitable and tries to call Dawes out on his political posturing, but Dawes very expertly deflects and makes it out that Holden is being naive, but his true purpose is that he suspects Fred Johnson is hiding something, and he's probing Holden and Naomi to try to find out what it is. He is, of course, correct. Johnson is hiding the fact that he has Kotazar, the scientist who knows about the protomolecule, but Holden and Naomi wisely give Dawes nothing. Now, this scene is so entirely different than anything that occurred in the novels. I really don't have much to say about this. Only that Holden never meets Dawes in the novels, and nothing even remotely close to this happens. And so this scene was fine, so I'll just give it a 0. So next we go back to the Martian ship where Draper is looking over her suit, where she meets Captain Martins, who she tells to fuck off before she realizes who she is and then apologizes. She then sees that he's a chaplain and so puts out that she was serious when she marked her religious affiliation as nun. But he insists that he isn't there in a religious capacity and is only concerned about her safety, and asks what she saw on Ganymede, and she mentions a drone, and he asks why this drone is so important to her, but then dismisses it as nothing and says that she'll be fine. Now, there was a Captain Martins in the novels. He talked to Draper while she was recovering in her bed, but well after Thorson did his interrogations. In this scene, you get the sense Martins is just pretending to be concerned about her, but is really just milking her for more information. But in the novels, you do get the sense that Martins really is on her side, and is really his chief concern is for her recovery after the trauma that she's experienced. And he mentions that he's not just a chaplain, but a psychologist. In fact, the whole aspect of him being a chaplain seems completely unnecessary for how he's been established here in the show. So ultimately, I like the book's versions better, so -1. So next we go back to Tycho to get a scene of Dawes going up to Drummer and trying to entice her to his side by complimenting her, but she says she likes it here in Tycho. It's also heavily implied in this scene that Drummer and Dawes have history together. When I first saw this scene, I thought it was a romantic history, the way Dawes got really close to her and whispered in her ear, but I'm now thinking it was more of a working relationship, but perhaps it was a little bit of both. He then offers to buy her a drink so they can toast to Fred Johnson's secret weapon, and she goes off with him. Now, when I first saw this scene, I thought it was implying that Drummer was going to tell him what Fred Johnson was hiding, and that she was in fact in league with Dawes, but as we soon learn, she doesn't tell Dawes anything, and in the following scene she has an extreme in the following season she has an extreme hatred for Dawes. So I am curious why she went to have drinks with him anyway, even though it was obvious that he was just fishing for information that she wasn't going to give him. I think maybe this was misdirection on the showrunner's part to try to fool the audience into thinking that she would give him up. If so, I think it's rather sloppy, as it now seems totally out of Drummer's character to behave this way. As for the novels, nothing like this remotely happens. None of these characters are even in book 2, nor is it implied that they know each other anywhere in the novels, and there's no scene even close to this that these characters could be standing in for. And because I think this was misdirection, sloppy misdirection, I'll give this a -3. So we go back to the Martian ship where they have Bobby attached to a machine while Thorson interrogates her about the incident on Ganymede. They also give her focus drugs so she can focus her mind. So she recounts the events of the 6 UN Marines charging their position with a 7th one behind them, but she keeps getting distracted about her team being killed, and Thorson has to tell her to focus. She then recites there was a drone overhead, and they were then engaged by the UN soldiers. In flashbacks, they show the protomolecule hybrid standing over her, and then she shouts out that the 7th man wasn't wearing a vac suit. And then you have Martins is like monitoring the interrogation, and he tells Thorson to stop. So this is quite different from the novels. As in the novels, I'll go back to the same scene I talked about already with Bobby waking up in the hospital bed and Thorson interrogating her there. In that case, he did give her focus drugs, and that forced her awake, so it's kind of similar in that regard. However, in the novels, Bobby didn't need focus drugs to remember what happened with the protomolecule hybrid as she remembered it very clearly, and she didn't get distracted by her team dying, instead was just pissed off at Thorson for not believing her. Also, it should be noted in the novels, Captain Martins was not Thorson's superior. It was the other way around. As in the show, Martins will go on to fulfill the role that Thorson played in the books. But as I mentioned in my coverage of the previous episode, I thought it was unnecessary to make the protomolecule hybrid's presence a mystery, and we missed out on an excellent fight scene because of it. And I don't think that this interrogation scene adds anything, so it just seems like a way to drag the story out to me, so -2. So then we go back to Tycho to see Dawes approach Diago in his room and again compliment him for his help in the recent protomolecule incident and praises Miller as a hero, which we know he doesn't mean because he actually hates Miller, but it's his way of cozying up to Diago. He, of course, is again trying to find out what Johnson is up to, and this time it works as Diago falls for it hook, line, and sinker, and in fact, from now on, he will become a fully devoted to Dawes. So in the novels, Diago doesn't appear past the scene where he and Miller plant the bombs on Eros, and as I mentioned, Dawes isn't the same character in the novels, so he never corrupts Diago. So this is where Diago begins to become an unlikable character and, dare I say, villain. Some may see this as corrupting his character, but I actually think it's a great way for the show to utilize existing characters. I also love this scene for the way that Dawes is so political and so manipulative. He knows exactly how to turn someone as naive as Diago to his side. It makes Dawes a great villain despite being nothing like his book counterpart, so I'll give this a +2. So we then go back to the MCRN ship where Draper is looking over her damaged battlesuit when Thorson comes in and gives her a Medal of Honor for her bravery in battle and then informs her she is going to testify on what she experienced on Ganymede, but tells her she's going to say that her team fired on the UN first and unprovoked. When she tries to protest that that isn't what happened, Thorson tries to tell her that she's confused and that there's a bigger picture here and she needs to simply do as instructed. When Bobby brings up the thing, Thorson gets aggressive and gets right into her face and makes it clear that he doesn't want to hear any more talk about a thing. He then changes tack and tries to comfort her with the story, but Draper snaps back that a story won't sell her on this bullshit. But she then realizes she's out of line addressing a superior that way and apologizes. Thorson just scrutinizes her and informs her that she's going to Earth to testify. Now, in the novels, getting back to the scene with Bobby lying in the hospital bed being questioned by Thorson, when Thorson doesn't believe her when she mentions the monster, she says there's proof, but Thorson says that nothing was recorded due to the jamming. When she asks about the footage on her own battlesuit, he said nothing was recovered, but she remembered that she was using an older version of the battlesuit and therefore the tech was probably using the wrong decryption process to recover the data. So she tells them the correct way to do it, and Thorson calls the tech immediately in to do it, and the tech admits that he didn't remember to use a different method for the older suit. So he uses the correct method, and they do in fact recover the footage of the protomolecule hybrid's attack, proof that it was there. Plus the fact that she was using an old battlesuit was probably why the jamming didn't work for her recorders where it worked for all the other recorders. So this is a way that it actually slipped by whoever was running this protomolecule hybrid attack, that they were able to get recorded proof. And Thorson then apologizes to Bobby and says that the fact there's proof now that Mars didn't provoke the attack will avert a war, and he praises her for her efforts. And so Mars officially acknowledges the existence of the protomolecule hybrid and the role it played in the attack. In fact, they seem relieved at this revelation as they didn't want to take the blame for the attack. Now, I understand the reason why the show changed this up, because the show is establishing a different dynamic where Mars participated in this hybrid attack, and in fact, they bought the proto-molecule hybrid technology from Jules Pierre Mao after this demonstration, so they are trying desperately to hide the fact that anything happened. Whereas in the novels, it was Ehrenreich who bought the proto-molecule hybrid from Mao, but the show had to repurpose Ehrenreich and Mao's connection for the book 1 material involving Eros, and at this stage in the show, Mao had already cut ties with Ehrenreich and has moved over to Mars, but in the novels, Ehrenreich was just being introduced at this part of the story, so the relationship actually begins here, if that makes any sense. I do like the book's version of events better ultimately, but I do understand why they repurposed and changed things around for the show's format. And I do think this sets up nicely for the dynamic of the Martians hiding the protomolecule. But I prefer actually, seeing them actually have evidence of the hybrid attack, and thus Draper is vindicated. So either way, so I'm kind of split. There's pros and cons. So I'm going to give this a 0. So back on Tycho, we see Holden talking to Fred Johnson about Kotazar as he continues to work on the protomolecule and getting more information for him. Holden seems worried about this, saying that it could lead to just more destruction and death, but Johnson seems to believe that it will be in the right hands and it will give him the leverage that he needs. This doesn't seem to sit right with Holden, who later, whilst Naomi is sleeping, he sneaks off in the middle of the night to grabs a gun with the intention of killing Kotazar. However, when he arrives in his cell, he finds that he's too late and Kotazar is already gone. Now, as I mentioned before, this Kotazar storyline didn't exist in the book, so nothing like this happened. However, I do like how this perfectly sets up for the storyline of Holden becoming overwhelmed with wanting to wipe out the protomolecule at all costs and actually becoming more sort of hate-filled. And I do think it's a brilliant way to set up for this change in Holden's character, that he would be willing to gun down a man in cold blood in order to stop the protomolecule from being spread, almost as if he's become Miller. So I'll give this a +3. However, Kotazar is gone because Dawes got to him first, as we see Dawes and Diago taking him off the station, but Holden is able to alert Fred Johnson, who locks down all the berths, but someone overrides his lockout and Dawes leaves anyway, no doubt with the help of a tech of Tycho that he managed to corrupt. So Holden sends the Rocinante after them, but only Naomi and Alex are on board, but he tells them not to wait and to leave immediately. So they chase after them, but but Dawes uses a tactic to go dark so the Rocinante can't find them. But Alex then reacquires the target, and so he shoots at the ship and damages its engines, so the ship can't run, so they dock with the ship. Naomi seems reluctant to arm up, but Alex is forcefully insistent, so they arm up and they prepare to storm Dawes' ship, but when the airlock opens, they only see one person with his hands up, and it turns out to be Diago. So it turns out that he was on a decoy ship, and that the ship that actually has Dawes and Kotazar on it got away, while Diago was distracting them. So again, nothing remotely close to this happens in the novels, but I thought it was a great way to continue on the thread that they set up, and again portrays the version of Dawes as a smart and devious villain. It was also interesting seeing Alex and Naomi go off on an adventure on their own. It was interesting. It almost seemed like Alex was ordering Naomi around, but I think they were just trying to show how reluctant she was to attack other Belters, which I didn't really care for that aspect of it, but I did really like the plot with the decoy, so I'm going to give this a +1. So my final adaptation score for The Seventh Man is a -6. I wouldn't say this was a particularly bad episode. Maybe it was one of the more dull episodes of Season 2, considering how great most of the rest of the season was. But it did have some great stuff in it, like Draper realizing the monster attacked, and Dawes showing off what a devious villain he is. It's just, when compared to the novels, I think the novels handled these storylines better. So in that sense, it doesn't quite hold up, but still a decent episode in its own right. So that's it for my book to show comparison for The Seventh Man. I must announce that because I'm taking a break from releasing videos in the month of September and will be busy with other videos when I return, I won't be able to return to this book to show comparison series for another 2.5 months. So it will be at least that long before I release any more of these videos, but hopefully when I come back, I'll be able to release them with more frequency. In the meantime, you can check out my channel for many other videos on The Expanse, as well as I do other videos on shows like Star Trek, Game of Thrones, Babylon 5, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.